What a great audience. We're all here. We're only a few minutes late.
Are we on time?
Yes, we're definitely on time. We're good?
He's becoming a script.
Right.
I heard him before. He doesn't answer.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody who may be watching online. I think we're now officially live. So welcome to this session on nature. Looking at the nature business nexus from understanding to action. My name is Emma Cox. I'm Global Climate Leader at PwC, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to what are the closing straits of what I'm sure for many of you have been an exhausting couple of weeks at COP. But today is Nature Day, and that is fundamentally important to us all. We need to understand more about the intersection between climate and nature and climate. And as business, civil society, state actors, whoever you are, Voice of Youth, Indigenous peoples, etc., we've all got to work together because we've heard many times that nature is in a parlous state. We've lost 69% of the world's wildlife since 1970, according to the report by WWF. We are fundamentally dependent for everything that we do on nature. So if we don't take action now, we threaten the future of our planet, or at least our species on this planet. The planet will survive, but we as humanity, I fear, will not. So the good news is, before the doom and gloom, that we can do something about that. And that's what this panel is to talk about. It's to talk about actually what are the actions that business can take, should take, is taking, sharing some ideas, sharing what the frameworks, methodologies are around, sharing how finance can come to the table, sharing how big business can come to the table, and sharing how business can set a strategy for action. I'm joined today by a fantastic panel. We're going to start with a fireside chat with Alex Antonelli from Q. So in one moment, if you'd like to come up, Alex, that would be great. And then I'll introduce the rest of the panel and we'll have a bit of a discussion thereafter. Should we have a seat? I think that's probably going to be more comfortable. You can tell we rehearsed this one earlier, can't you? I'm going to sit over here. There we go. Before we start, Alex, at PwC, we've said that nature is fundamentally important to us as a business, and we launched our Centre for Nature Positive Business earlier this year with a commitment to really put nature at the heart of our strategy, helping business take action, helping develop the frameworks and methodologies that are needed to drive that action. But that's against a backdrop of understanding that this is important, the science is important, nature is at a state of crisis. You're a professor of science at Q. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Q and about the nature of the work that you do there? And I live about a mile away from Kew, and I'm in and out every weekend that I possibly can be, because it's the most beautiful place. But there's a lot more to it than just going there as a visitor and wandering through the gardens itself. So it'd be lovely to hear a bit from you.
Thanks so much, Emma, and it's great to be here. So many people who found their way to this meeting today, and it's really fantastic to be talking about nature and about the interactions with the different companies trying to do the right thing. So Kew is a fantastic place. It's a botanic garden in southwest London, and most people who come to the UK hear about Kew Gardens as this major tourist attraction. But we are also a science-based organization, and that's the core of our purpose. We are about 500 scientists employed at Kew, plus about 250 postdocs, PhDs, and associated researchers. And we are working in more than 110 different countries with 400 different partners around the world. We are a World Heritage Site. We've been around for more than 260 years. And in some places like Tanzania, we've been working for more than 100 years. So it's really fantastic to have that kind of long-term collaboration. And just to exemplify the kind of work we're doing, for instance, we hold the largest collection of plants and fungi in the world. And that's both the living collections and the preserved collections, which is a fantastic asset to many different challenges that companies are facing. So I just want to give 3 examples about the kind of work we're doing to exemplify and illustrate a bit of those interactions. So the first one is that we help companies to authenticate audit and certify what they are selling. So, for instance, we have an agreement, contract with P&G, Procter & Gamble, and we authenticate the components. Like if you buy a shampoo with aloe, we can justify that this is the right ingredient there, and we do that in different ways. For instance, we work with IKEA to identify the source of the species used in rattan. So we have a DNA-based approach where we can really testify whether a species of rattan that's used is threatened or not. And that's the same thing for P&G, where we can both identify those but also suggest alternatives in those products. And we can use stable isotopes, which is a chemical signature that lots of different products have, like soybeans, where they come from. And that's the kind of work where we're using information in the collections as references to identify products that are being sold by different companies. My second example is about providing the alternatives. And for instance, if you come to visit us at the UK Pavilion, you get some free, delicious coffee. And that coffee is one example of the work we're doing in terms of replacing some of the traditional crops with alternatives which are better fit for a warmer and more unstable climate. Robusta and Arabica coffee are the only two species used nowadays, but we've been researching among the 120 different species of coffee, and some of them which are much more resilient to a warmer climate than the Arabic and Robusta coffee. And the third example is about providing advice to companies in terms of what they can do to get the right outcomes for the intention. And for instance, reforestation and towards a net positive future, we need to bring back and repair some of the nature we've degraded around the world. So we've defined a set of 10 golden rules for successful reforestation, which is based, for instance, on the principles of using native species, working with communities, looking at the genetic provenance of different seeds, seed supplies, and so forth, so that we can really bring benefits to fight climate change, so in terms of sequestration and storage of carbon, but also bring benefits to biodiversity and to the livelihoods of people working in those different areas. And we're also providing advice to companies and governments on other areas, such as biodiversity credits now, where our chair of Q, Dame Amelia Fawcett, is co-leading a workforce now to look at how biodiversity credits may then contribute to providing the restoration and conservation targets that are signed by almost 200 countries in the new global Montreal Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework. So those are just examples of the kind of work we're doing at Q.
And Alex, do you find that businesses understand the types of solutions that you can offer? And what are the sort of challenges that they find that you're able to help them overcome?
I think the key thing here is for businesses to work on the problem definition and work with scientists. So, as I said, we are here to help. And the worst thing we can do is to develop some fantastic science and sit in an ivory tower and then hope that at the end our scientific articles are going to be of interest to someone, although we don't actually know that from the beginning. So for us, it's really important to identify what are the challenges that you as corporates as a really important part of society and our ability to hit those global climate and biodiversity targets, and how can we possibly help? So I think that interaction is needed on both sides. I think we as scientists need to be reaching out to the corporate sector, to policy, government, but also vice versa. Scientists exist to try and solve challenges that are perhaps sometimes very applied and perhaps more of a fundamental nature to understand, for instance, what is the baseline we're trying to achieve when we restore an ecosystem. So I think the challenge is about the problem formulation and that communication across different stakeholders in society.
And have you found in the last year that the level of interest from business has gone up, stayed the same, changed in nature?
I think it has increased hugely. And the kind of questions we are getting almost on a daily basis are actually more complicated than most corporates realize. I think a lot of times we are approached to, provide a solution off the shelf, which is, sometimes I get emails. We have the restoration project. Which tree species should I plant? And people don't understand that it varies across different regions, across different purposes. We need to understand, whether the trees we're planting now are going to survive in the future, because mortality is a huge problem in any kind of restoration project. And often it's not only about planting trees, it's about protecting what we have. And that's really the number one challenge. I am Brazilian. I'm very proud to come from the country which has the highest diversity on this planet, but it's also the country which has still the highest deforestation rates. It really hurts my heart to see that we are still losing about 1 million hectares of pristine forest every single year. I think we have to celebrate that the rates have decreased thanks to the political commitment, but still, we need to protect, and I think companies need to help us to direct the investments towards protection first and then restoration on the side, in parallel. But now it's all about additionality, and that's not going to solve the challenge of keeping nature, that we still have.
Absolutely. And within the scientific community, how much are you working together? We'll come on maybe and explore how businesses are working together. But across the scientific community, have you got a consensus about what the way forward is, or what are the challenges there?
Good question. And
we don't have very long, so...
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we have to realize that I don't want to have like a single lab in the world trying to cure AIDS or some of the other major diseases. So I think in a sense scientific disagreement is healthy, because it does build on people challenging the status quo, and in a sense we don't have consensus about everything. But I think we scientists tend to overcomplicate things, and we want to have a perfect answer about how to measure biodiversity and how to measure biodiversity over time. And we know that we need to simplify it. We need to make it in a way that is applicable, and we have those tools. We can do that already now. We cannot blame that we don't have the level of development of methods that are needed for businesses. So I think we already now can do much better than what's being done today. And we do have the partnerships in place to, again, respond to the requests we're receiving from industry. For instance, now in this COP, we are pleased to announce that we are working very closely with the Natural History Museum and the Zoological Society of London as a joint biodiversity alliance. So we are coming together as a united force and word, so that we can really address those challenges that companies have, and hopefully we'll be strengthening those over time as well.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. I wish we could carry on for a whole lot longer. We are going to have refreshments afterwards, and Alex, I think you're able to stay around for at least a little bit.
Absolutely, for the refreshments, yes.
Food works in this place, right? Alex, thank you. That was a fascinating snapshot of life as a professor of science at Kew. Do stay up here while we join and bring our panel up, and then we can have more of a discussion afterwards. So can I now ask, and I'm going to slip to an end because I think that's probably better. Can I ask, please, Eva, who is CEO of Business for Nature. All of you come on up. Dan from PwC TNFD member, Oliver from Standard Chartered, head of biodiversity, and Rob Cameron from Nestle, whose title I always get slightly wrong, but I will read it. Global Head of Public Affairs and ESG Engagement. There we go, snappy.
Poetry, isn't it?
Poetry in motion. Now, Rob and I have done a number of panels together during the course of and in fact Eva as well, over the course of the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that he said to me on the way in was, we've done a lot of panels so far. Can we shake this up a little bit? Now, the rest of the panel doesn't know this, but there we go. This is all right. We're getting towards the end. One of the things I wanted to start by asking was, can we get a little poll of who's in the audience? So who do we have here who is from business? Would classify yourself from business. Fantastic. That's about a third to a half. Of those, how many are in finance as opposed to real economy sectors? Do we have any other financiers in the... A little bit. Okay, so that's interesting. So we have Oliver here from Standard Chartered. You're preaching to a room full of people who know nothing. Maybe we'll find out. Well, we will see. Who do we have here from parties? Anyone associated with governments, etc.? I think they're all in negotiating rooms, really hard locked on trying to get solutions. And then who's here from, say, NGOs, civil society? Right. And any other categories I haven't covered? From media, press, very interesting. Right. Professional services. Well, there's a bunch of us. I call that business.
No, business, is it?
Call that business, right. So look, we're here together to try and work out how business can work with nature. And I'd like to start actually, Eva, with you. You have a wonderfully named organisation, Business for Nature.
It's trademarked.
It works very well. You heard from Alex about the rise of interest of business in nature, but also about businesses' relative incompetence is probably the wrong word, but sort of assumptions that actually solutions are easy and you can all roll it out very easily, and they may not have actually understood it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Business for Nature, and in particular the It's Now for Nature campaign, which I hope will help businesses get a strategy so that when they come and ask you, Alex, they'll have more of a clue what they're asking for. But Eva, do shed some light on that.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Who here has heard of the It's Now for Nature campaign? It's nowfornature.org. Fantastic. So for those of you who haven't yet, this has been our major campaign that we jointly pulled together across our coalition with support from PwC UK to accelerate business action, and the core of it is around having a strategy. So as we were brainstorming straight off the bat of the Global Biodiversity Framework Agreement in December last year, we were thinking about what happened with the Paris Agreement and how helpful it could have been to very quickly have a generally accepted framework or guidance or handbook for how companies could develop their net zero strategies and plans. And so we got together very quickly to develop this nature strategy handbook available in multiple languages. What's special about the It's Now for Nature campaign is that it's going to last to 2030. So this is a longer term campaign, and we're not interested in companies saying they're going to develop a strategy. We just would like them to please submit their strategy already, and then we will get a collection over time, hopefully exponential towards 2030, of strategies that exist of how companies, what is their forward-looking plan to help halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. And we've seen that momentum since Business for Nature was set up in 2019, very much mirroring what We Mean Business and there's Maria, our sister coalition, did in the run-up to the Paris Agreement. And that trend, we were at some point, Lucy's concerned, our comms director, we were wondering if there would be a drop after COP15. And maybe there was a little bit of digestion of what happened, but certainly nature is still going up the business agenda.
Which is really great to hear, Eva. I think it would be nice. How can businesses actually get sort of involved if they haven't done a strategy yet? Are you asking them to disclose stuff before they've done that, or how does it work? Well,
I think we always were based on them. We've got to meet companies where they're at. So for a company that hasn't even understood what biodiversity means or what freshwater, land or oceans, how that relates to their whole value chain, then you've got to start off with some of the basics. And what's really great in our whole coalition is that we've agreed with TNFD, SBTN, WEF, WCSD, you name it. We've all come together to say there are 4 high-level actions that any company can take to assess, commit, transform, and disclose on nature. And that is actually the foundation for the Nature Strategy Handbook. What we would like to avoid, though, is that companies take 2 years doing a materiality assessment, using up all of their resources doing the materiality assessment and not actually getting on with the action. So earlier this year, with the WBCSD, WEF, and with input from many partners, we developed 12 sector-specific overviews, if you want, that just cut through and say, right, if you're not sure where to start, here are your top 5 impacts, top 5 dependencies, and top priority actions that you can take right now in your sector. It's like a one-pager, and then supported by much deeper information. But at least we can kind of leapfrog over some of that complexity and focus on the action right now that are sort of no-brainers.
Eva, that sounds great, because one of the things that I've heard here is people saying, it's all just too complicated.
Yeah, well, it's not really, because we've made it complicated. Thanks. No, it's not true. I'm an ecologist by training too, so I can get it. But it is complicated. But so is financial accounting complicated, and somehow we're fine with that. we're fine with the fact that people spend years learning how to do financial management and accounting is a man-made system, and yet we think that you should be able to do environmental and social accounting just like that. It's actually a field that people learn how to do. So there are something, just focus on protecting and restoring ecosystems along your value chain. Focus on reducing and avoiding your negative impacts, and then focus on trying to change the system in which you operate with whatever, raising your voice wherever you can in areas like that. And that's, I think, actually much more achievable than getting too much into the detail.
Eva, I think that's great, and I can hear, if you like, the passion that you bring to it, and thank you for all that you've been doing to push forward making nature really accessible to business. One of the things that has obviously been launched this year, and I'm going to turn to Dan at the end, if that's all right. Dan, you are our Task Force on Nature-related financial disclosure member representing PwC, but you're wearing that TNFD hat here today. Hearing what Eva's been talking about, and with TNFD having been launched in September, what do you see the role of TNFD in the framework that it has in engaging business? Just relatively briefly.
Yeah, the TNFD was really, it's a market-led initiative. It's the business community, it's the capital markets putting up their hand and saying, we need better information about what the risks and opportunities are related to nature and business. And so what it's done is it's basically pulled together the best information, the best science, the best existing frameworks under a single sort of umbrella and framework. And it's intentionally aligned itself with existing disclosure frameworks like the TCFD. It's aligned with GRI, it's aligned with ISSB, all of the different reporting frameworks to make it practicable and relatively straightforward for an organization to apply. So now we have a standardized approach that both corporates and financial institutions can apply to better understand what their interface is with nature, their impacts and dependencies on nature, but then also how that translates through into the risks and opportunities, the financial impacts, either positive or negative to a business. And I think that's the real key, because once you unlock that understanding of how these interactions affect your business and you start to communicate that, then you have the information to direct capital to sort of nature positive business outcomes.
That's great. And in that, I know you've run a bunch of workshops here this week, trying to bring that to life in a practical sense with businesses. Could you share a couple of insights that have come out of those workshops about how people are really experiencing it, what's happening, and any kind of advice to companies in the audience?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Eva, people, their initial sense is that this is very complicated, right? And there's this sense that, well, we don't have the data to make decisions or to inform ourselves on this. But that's actually not the case. And what we've done with the TNFD over the last couple of years is convened a group of data providers we call it the Data Catalyst Initiative. And the idea here is to bring together data providers, aggregators of data platforms to essentially illustrate and showcase to businesses and financial institutions how these different platforms can be used to address their assessments and their requirements. And it's actually, it's interesting when you bring them together and you hear from companies that have been involved in this space for quite a while, because, there's some very good practical examples of how they've gone through the stage of, initially looking at the high level, the coarse filter, where they have hotspots, where they have areas of risk across their portfolios, using tools like Encore and IBAT and different tools, and then how they've drilled down to get right down to the site specific, and even using things like eDNA, which is a way that you can basically sample DNA from water and air and soil to understand what the species are in those different locations. So these sessions have been, they've really brought to light how companies, how financial institutions, how corporates can actually utilize this data to get answers and start to, come up with these assessments and inform what they're putting into their reports. I would say the key challenge, though, that still exists is translating this through into financial impacts, either positive or negative to a business. So that's probably the one area where I think there needs to be a lot more work. And I think the key here is not just doing this in isolation. It's taking into consideration what's happening in the area that you're operating, the other businesses that you're working with, et cetera, in your sector.
That's great, Dan. Really helpful. Maybe, Oliver, coming on to you and the role of finance in business. You've heard from Dan that there is now a lot of data available. From a financial services perspective, are you happy to finance nature? Are you understanding what the nature finance needs are? Have you got what you require, or what more do you think is needed?
Yeah, thanks. So, I think it's worth just pointing out that sometimes we run the risk of creating this perception that this is a new topic for financial institutions. We've been managing environmental risks for a number of decades. And I think that talks to your point about where actually we know what the impacts are, we know what we need to do. Yes, we could definitely do more. But I think to Alex's point, and it was delightful to hear you talk about tools, we actually need tools, because as much as we can conceptually know what we need to do, we need to be able to test that, right? And we're a financial institution doing thousands of transactions, so we need to be able to do that cost effectively as well, right? Otherwise, we have to pass those costs down in the form of interest rates, right? In which case businesses suffer. So I do think that there is a significant risk right now that there is this perception this is completely new, and we end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Primary objective for us right now is keep impact out of the portfolio, right? And that's, a number of financial institutions.
And what do you mean by that exactly? Bring that to life a little bit.
So a number of financial institutions will have position statements with risk criteria, right? We will not finance clients that deforest, that operate in Ramsar wetlands, right? But all of that stuff has to be tested. And that's a process, and it takes people. The concern I have right now is that we're starting to focus a lot on disclosing impact. And this is going to be very, very costly, right? There are limited resources. So we've got to be very savvy as to whether we're focusing on disclosing the impact in the portfolio or really trying to stop the impact entering the portfolio. So first of all, I think that's really, really important. I think your point about the risk piece is spot on. I think that we're on top of the impact stuff, but the financial dependencies, we've really only scratched the surface of. And as a financial institution, that's what we really care about, right? Our job is to manage risk. And so the more we can understand what the financial risk is associated with impacts and dependencies, the better we can manage it. And to be quite frank, the more serious it will be taken inside a financial institution. We are regulated entities that have to manage risk. So I think the sooner we can get to understanding what the risk really means from a financial perspective, the sooner we're going to see real traction. I think there's also very important that we bring the opportunity set to this discussion sooner than we saw with climate, right? Climate seemed to be a lot of stop doing this, and we were very late with the transition finance opportunity, right? And actually, that's a really cool opportunity. And again, as a business, we have to make money, we have shareholders. Well, actually, transition finance represents a significant opportunity for us as a financial institution. So I think the same is going to apply to nature. I think right now, unfortunately, the monetizable opportunities around nature, largely carbon, right? But the economic value of nature can really be seen by sovereigns, right? And so we've seen this real ramp up in debt for nature swaps that focus on sovereigns, because those sovereigns can have an economic value on that nature. And I think that's really important. So I think we need to really focus where the big levers are that we can pull right now. And I think we've got to be very careful that we're not spending too much money on disclosing stuff and rather spend that money on doing restoration. Put the money into the field.
Put the money into the field. Rob, I'm going to come to you. Reactions to what you've heard from our friend Oliver there, and how does, for a big multinational corporation like Nestle, how does making progress across this agenda? I mean, you've been operating here for centuries or whatever, decades, but how does the shifting focus on nature affect you?
Approaching 160 years, to be precise. So just to pick up on the fact that it's Nature Day, and here we are talking about nexus between nature and business, there's a fundamental truth that we overlook, and I think it's helpful just to call it out at the beginning. The economy is a subsystem of the ecosystem. period. But we forget that, you know. But it's true. Everything around us, this suit, probably the carpet, certainly the food that we'll eat, the wine that we'll drink, etc., etc. These are all coming from subsystems of the ecosystem. And nowhere is that more true than a food and beverage company that depends wholly upon agriculture for its future. Wholly. So if we want to be around for the next 160 years, we need a stable climate and we need a stable environment in which we can support the farmers and buy from the farmers for the ingredients that we depend upon. Now, for us, this is not new news. We've known this for some time. And in fact, what we did when we launched our net zero roadmap was we built off of the success that we had seen in our forests work that had been going on for some 10 years prior, which may be an area we want to get into because, quite frankly, coming back to this point about, feeling a little bit like I want to ginger it up a bit. I'm absolutely so frustrated at the lack of progress on forests. It's pitiful, frankly. We're still funding the destruction of forests, and food and beverage companies have not got time-bound deforestation plans in place. And yet here we are, we're like years into this now. But just specifically, since we're here at a COP on climate, when we went about the business of our net zero roadmap, it was fundamentally clear. Johan Rockström, most of you will have heard him speak at some point during this. I think there's 3 of him wandering around the place, if I'm honest, making the point that we cannot address climate change without addressing nature. You've heard that repeatedly. And in fact, not only is it that we can't fix climate without addressing nature, it's going to get worse if we don't address nature. Well, he's absolutely right, of course. So scientifically, yes, 100%. But I think that, for us, that was clear when we did the net zero roadmap, because all of our emissions, more or less, 90% anyway, are scope 3, of which the vast majority are agriculture. So we have to get into the natural world. And so, for us, it was absolutely front and center that we have to be thinking about nature-based solutions and a full-scale pivot on regenerative agricultural practices. That's where we can, to your point about not stopping doing something but start doing something, that push into regenerative agriculture, our net zero roadmap depends upon that. And I think one of the things about it that we need to also reflect upon a little bit, and it's partly why I think we're struggling, I think collectively Nestle has got this in its head now. It's people. We often say, and this is another thing I really would urge to take away from here, we often say we've got to address climate change, we need to address nature, and it's got to be in a just transition. I think it's time for us to start turning that the other way around and think about we need to protect and enhance farmer and forest dweller livelihoods by mitigating and adapting to climate change and protecting nature. So that we kind of put that first, because trees don't fall down on their own, and regenerative agriculture isn't going to happen unless farmers want to make a change. So we need to think about the people side of this and bring the social dimension right to the heart of it. I mean, I could go on this one. Now you've got me started, but I'll leave it there for now. Maybe we'll come back.
Yeah. Alex, listening to this, maybe just bring you back into the conversation here. Is there anything that you've heard here that surprises you or shocks you? Or what would your message be, having heard now from these 4 people about where we're heading on nature?
Very interesting discussion. Perhaps to the point about, should we put people at the center? I think, conservation does need to embrace the needs of the people, because otherwise it will fail. But I think it also depends on whether we have a biocentric or human-centric view of the world, and the fact that we all depend on, nature to survive. And I think we all can agree on that. We are part of nature, and I think we have to be a bit humble about the fact that species and nature are not here for us, and we're part of it. And I do think, in terms of humility of understanding what nature can give us now and in the future is something that we absolutely have to, understand. I think the point about data, I agree that we shouldn't wait until we have more data to start acting. But I do see that companies are not really understanding that you can't do everything in front of your desktop computer. And, you did mention about environmental DNA and about the tools we do have today. And I think that companies that are serious about, the next industry, the next factory, the next supply chain component, I think we absolutely need to understand that this does need data generation as well, and that will in turn require community engagement and training and capacity building, because we have a terrible shortfall now in terms of the fine level data that is needed to understand what's the true impact, biodiversity, environmental impact of companies around the world. And I agree that agriculture, so food production, is the #1 cause of biodiversity loss. We've heard it's 69% at a global level in terms of population decline, 1 million species threatened. We estimate 45% of all species being threatened. And food production agriculture is really #1. It also contributes 37% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a major contribution to pollution as well. So I think the triple crisis that the United Nations has identified does boil down to a large extent to what we eat and how we can make that more sustainable.
So if you were sitting, and I'm going to ask each of you this, if you're sitting in the negotiation halls now, and you've got, well, how many days have we got left? Depends when we finish, doesn't it? There are sweepstakes going on. What would be your message that you would like to ask the negotiators to include that would help deliver what we need on nature? And I'm not going to come to you first, Rob. I can see you gagging to answer this one. Maybe Oliver, start with the world of finance. What do we need?
I mean, it's a very tough question. I'll be honest, I think we need policy, and I think Alex touched on this, right, in terms of the Brazil deforestation rates. They have dropped, 60% since Lula came into power? That's politics. We can talk about private sector, financial institutions for as long as we want. That single change in government reduced it by 60%, right? So I think ultimately we have to start with the political willingness. And that political willingness creates a degree of certainty, and certainty attracts capital, right? So for me, yes, the private sector has got a role to play, and I really do think that the private sector is stepping up, right? The fact that we're in this room today having this discussion is a representative of that. But I just think we've got to hold government to account more. And when we look at the GBF, I want to see the implications of the GBF start trickling down and impact me.
So Eva, you were there at the signing of the GBF, and how do you see the interplay between the GBF and where we are here today, and what you're hopeful for?
Well, thanks. To answer the question of what we would tell negotiators is phase out fossil fuel, thank you very much, just to be clear. And then, of course, try and build nature further into the text. Right now, they're also making reference to the GBF in the negotiated text, very helpful in the global stocktake, as far as I can understand. So the implementation point about the GBF and wanting to see the implementation trickle down, I would argue, of course, but all the businesses in this room and outside of this room are part of making that a reality, because as long as it's an ambition loop.
Sorry, can I just jump in there though? Because private sector is competitive. We're trying to make a profit, and we have competitors. And when there are different rules, right?
100%, we need to level the playing field.
That's the point. We need to level the playing field.
But we need that level playing field to be high. Yes, but what I'm saying is it's not just a matter of saying, let's let the negotiators and the governments come up with those rules. We need to also be influencing to raise the policy ambition, so that then those rules, we agree. Okay, we're on the same page. Just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so we need good policy that works, that business inputs to. Is that what we're saying?
Exactly, and I think across the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, we need that policy coherence, we need the clarity, the certainty, and the consistency of what we're actually asking companies to do, because oftentimes in business and finance, they get the fact that it's all part of the same issue, but it's then artificially been separated through these different political processes, which has been quite unhelpful.
Yeah. So, Rob, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, look, one thing we do know, we've been doing it long enough now in terms of driving through regenerative practices, whether we're talking about coffee farmers with interspersing their coffee rows with cash crops, whether we're talking about low-till, it depends where you are. Dairy, we've got examples in dairy, Vietnam, we've got all around the world, in all contexts now, we could point to a series of case studies where we can show farmer livelihoods improving, impact on nature declining, positive impact increasing. So we've got the demonstrations there. The thing is that, going back to the earlier point about the economy and the subsystem and so on, is that we do put a value on nature which is zero, right? So what that means is that all of those projects which you can find on our website, all of those projects we're financing. Now, sometimes here and there, especially with the IRA, we're starting to find some pockets of public money.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Inflation Reduction Act. We can see examples where we work with the likes of Cargill or ADM and we're getting matched funding. That makes a significant difference. So wheat, for example, and ranching in North America. So what we're looking for here now are a couple of things. Firstly, we need it's too easy to say end environmentally harmful subsidies in agriculture. I mean, of course, that kind of almost goes without saying. What we need to do is encourage positive public money that supports the outcomes that we're demonstrating are possible in terms of improving livelihoods. That would be a huge step forward if we could do that. The other thing, which I think, to your point about the negotiators, we're at a stage now where we had, for the first time ever, the Emirates Resilient Food Systems, Sustainable Food Systems Declaration on, I think it was day one, seems like a lifetime ago, but that declaration was the first time there'd been a member state declaration associated with the food sector. And it was very explicit. Put food in your NDCs. So there's a good call to arms. Now, not only was it the first time that there'd been a declaration on food, it was also the first time there'd been a coordinated non-state actor declaration on the same day that docked right into that Emirates declaration. That was us, the non-state actors, saying, terrific, well done for those 5 things. Here's how we'll help to make it real. Followed up by the action agenda on regenerative landscapes, where 25 of us come together to try and create a gravitational pull, where if we aggregate all of the efforts that we're making on regeneration, then we can perhaps find a way to make it more fundable, more bankable, and demonstrate to governments that this actually is making a difference. So, but that's us doing it. And actually what we need is a little bit more coordination from governments, because here we are having done all that, and guess what? The agriculture talks set up in Sharm have run into the sand and have been abandoned until Bonn next year, which is, such a shame. Just at the point where you think, hallelujah, they've got it, suddenly we haven't got it. So,
but we have to keep driving forward, don't we? We have to, absolutely. Dan, anything from your perspective in terms of where we are and the ability to get the enabling environment and the frameworks and the processes?
I mean, we talk a lot about the sort of carrot and the stick, and I think both are necessary, the opportunity side, but also the need for policy and regulation. So what I would say is the frameworks need to be in place to demonstrate how the private sector can align with the 30 by 30 GBF objectives. And that means demonstrating regionally what the management practices are that businesses have to follow to ensure sustainable management of the resources. So I would say that there's a role for government to play here to sort of provide that state of what good looks like and how organizations should be operating to maintain the ecosystem services and the environmental assets. But I think the other aspect here is recognizing that there are externalities, that there is a need to put a price on nature in order to sort of recognize the fact that where there are impacts, it shouldn't, the cost of that shouldn't flow through to the public sector and to the public, because more and more we're starting to see where you have these breakdowns in systems and you have those costs flowing through to the insurance industry, to the public, and in the form of disaster relief and whatnot. So pricing that in up front is also really necessary.
Great answers from everybody. I'm conscious we've got a room full of really able people, probably steeped in expertise. I'd love to throw it open to the floor now, either to pick up on anything that we've covered, and we've kind of ranged relatively far and wide, or to ask a direct question of any of our panelists. Who would like to, and I'm sure we've got some mics somewhere, who'd like to make a comment or ask a question? Right. So I think maybe in the centre first, and then we'll go over to the back. We'll take a few. In the centre, Jenny?
Hi, it was about...
And do introduce yourself.
Yeah, sorry,
and
Jenny Dodson, Senior Director at WBCSD. It was about this kind of connection in the capital markets on the kind of valuation of the risks and opportunities. Just interested in, even if there is this reporting and disclosure, often there's valuation and the capital markets have got a very short time frame, but the risks or opportunities are occurring on a much longer time frame, and also, are disruptive, right? They're non-linear changes. How can we really kind of make that connection between these longer-term risks, these longer-term opportunities, and this non-linear change with the capital market?
It is an excellent question, and it is something I don't have an answer for, and I don't think the market has an answer for, right? You spot on. I mean, as a house, we provide debt financing, right? To achieve nature outcomes, 10 years plus, right? Seldom is our financing 10 years plus, right? So it's not necessarily about tying it to the financing, but I think it then comes down to the client relationship, right? Because we would like to have the client for a long time, right? We want to be long-term greedy. And so for us, it then becomes perhaps not looking at transactions, but looking at that client relationship and what is the risk that the client will face. But unfortunately, we're still not quite there with being able to nicely quantify, it's this much financial risk on the table. I think once we've got that, that's going to enable some much stronger conversations, and I think that we're starting to see that with climate, right? Those engagements with clients around their climate risk. It's the client, not the transaction.
Do you want to build on that, Rob?
A quick reflection. I'm not an accountant. I'm not an investment manager. But I can see, and I think we would all agree, that nature is the infrastructure upon which we all depend. I think we could more or less agree that? Yes. Yeah, thank you. However, when we invest in infrastructure at Nestle, if we invest in a factory, a plant, any kind of new thing, we capitalize the asset. We invest in nature that's going to take us 10, as you just said, 10 years to see the return. In fairness, actually, we can see returns quicker than that. But generally speaking, you're talking about a long-term play, and you're talking about an appreciating, not depreciating asset. We can't put that on the balance sheet. It's OPEX. So it has to come out of this year's P&L. And I just do not understand why we are stuck with an accounting system that says you have to pay this now out of your P&L, and we've got shareholders that are pressing us for returns. You've got to pay it out of your P&L now. And you're going to get the return over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and long-term future of the business. That makes no sense to me. We've got to change the accounting rules.
Eva.
I agree with that, absolutely. And also, I was just thinking that, what can we do today? Because we're not going to change the accounting rules today. But, okay, well then, let's do it. But I don't know.
Precedents.
However, what companies can do today is make sure that they have a strategy which incorporates all of those short-term and long-term risks. And if you're investing in natural infrastructure like wetlands instead of water filtration plants, well, hey, you might not be able to show it on your balance sheet straight away, but it can be part of a really sensible strategy for how you're going to mitigate potential risks and opportunities. So as investors, surely you want to look at company strategies to see how well they are prepared for these future risks, even if we don't have the full accounting.
I'm going to take a couple.
I just want to quickly jump.
I'm going to call moderator preference here. You can build on it later. Can I take two more questions? Can I take one in the front and one at the back? Yeah, I'll take Magdi and do introduce yourself first.
Do you hear me? No.
Yes. Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. It's not a question, it's a comment. Firstly, I'm Magdi. I'm the Chief Operations Officer outgoing from Nestle. I'm retiring in a couple of weeks. Just a couple of comments. When we look at CapEx versus OPEX, it's very possible, and we're doing this, but this is investing in new technologies. And those new technologies are meant to reduce the risk. So I think rather than putting a price on nature, if I may, we should put a benefit on reducing risk. And I think that's yet is an area, if there is something that business, together with banking system and insurance companies, big absence of this debate, or in this debate are insurance companies, is to assess the risk and how can we reduce the risk. We don't know all the technologies today, but it doesn't matter. If we put technologies in place, like we have put technologies that we know, there are technologies coming in the next decade that we don't know, which will come. We need to trust the evolution of technology, and we need to reduce the risk for farmers. Because this transition is not going to happen with the current risk system. Nobody will be willing to insure those risks. So it's like in any other business. Take earthquake. Earthquakes, people understand some of the risks. The insurance will insure you, but the premium will be at a certain level. Today, if we had to do that in agriculture, the premium will be so high that nobody would accept to insure. And that's a gap. So I think this is what we need to be working on more aggressively. Banks, insurance companies, and private sector, because we know how to reduce the risks. Not everything, but we know. And then try to bring it to a level that can be insurable. And then we will see momentum. So we are doing CapEx, but we're doing CapEx in technologies that do exist. We can't do CapEx in something that does not exist.
So,
but changing the, I mean, we are in one club, Rob and me, but changing the accounting system, good luck. I think we would better, work on things to make sure how we use best the current accounting system.
Yeah.
And the reporting of non-financial KPIs is a good start.
yes, absolutely. So thank you very much for that helpful comment and interjection. And then can we take it at the back, in the middle, sorry, over there, first? And do introduce yourself.
Thanks, Chantal from PwC South Africa. I would love to know any reflections from anyone in the panel around nature's, sort of the scope 3 of nature, so value chain, and specifically thinking around not just the impacts or dependencies, but around the resource use, resource efficiency, circularity type of thinking, and how you see that playing out in this space.
So thoughts on the scope 3 of nature, opportunities for that, value chains.
But also resource use, not necessarily just the impact, but managing the costs and efficiency. So bringing the value chain in from that.
And maybe start with Dan at the end. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, that's a fundamental difference from TNFD and TCFD, is this need to look across your value chain and understand impacts and dependencies of that value chain. But I think there's lots of examples where companies that can work with their value chain, both with suppliers and their customers, to find ways to do things more efficiently that actually create value, right? We have one client that we've been working with that's looking at trying to manage deforestation risk in their supply chain. And by doing so, they've found ways to work with their suppliers that are actually more efficient, and they're saving time, saving cost, and in doing so, they're actually also mitigating and reducing their scope 3 emissions as well. So there are good examples where working with your supply chain, working with your suppliers can actually have sort of dual benefits as well.
Maybe Alex, I can bring you in, and then maybe Eva on this. You were talking at the beginning about solutions that you'd worked with companies on. How much were they thinking about their value chain as opposed to what they control directly when you were looking for those alternative ideas and sources of materials for them?
It's hard to speak on their behalf, and what kind of thinking there has been from the beginning, but my strong feeling is that there hasn't been really a wide acknowledgement of the supply chains in their totality. And I think, in a sense, a lot of the components of different products have not really been put the right value in terms of water resources, in terms of the pollination services, and that has been for free, but it has not really translated into any sort of wider responsibility, I think, because everyone's been waiting for someone else. And I think back to the point about the political will and advice to COP leaders and negotiators, I think in the end of the day, it's not very much about what they're negotiating now, but it's about the regulatory system, which will oblige to a certain extent companies, governments to take responsibility for the full impact, which is much beyond, I think, what we're measuring today in terms of supply chains and other impacts that environmental consequence of what we're doing in terms of activities here.
Great comment. Eva, do you want to add?
Just suffice this, I was just going to add that in Target 15 in the Global Biodiversity Framework, it's very explicit about the fact that it's not just direct operations, but the full value chain. And clearly, that's where for most or many companies, biggest impacts are, of course, so we know that, and the biggest dependencies are. So I'll leave it at that.
Maybe one other point, though. When you're looking at the value chain, it's often the small, medium-sized businesses or smallholders that are the ones that you need to interact with, right? And that's where probably the biggest challenge is trying to work with smallholders. And there's really sort of two key things. They need to know how. They need to have the instructions, the skills, the alternative practices. But then they also, I think, to maybe somebody else's point earlier, is they need to have the risk taken out of the equation because they don't have a willingness to take on risk. They don't have the ability, right? So how can you work with your supply chain to both provide them with the mechanisms for how they're going to do this, but also to remove that risk so that it's an easy decision for them to do that.
And maybe, Oliver, maybe you'd like to just sort of build on that a little bit. When you're looking at your portfolio, how much do you feel that the companies that you invest in understand the inherent nature-related risk in their supply chains, or how much do you understand that at this point versus where would you like to get to?
So I'll be honest, it depends on the sectors, right? I mean, we're a global bank operating in emerging markets. When we look at the extractives industry, for example, people are very well aware of what's going on, right? I'm going to pick on agric here. Strangely enough, this is actually a sector where, despite intuitively and science telling us that this is a high-risk sector, not that good. However, I think there is a really good example where there's been, I consider, massive success is palm oil, right? When we look at deforestation rates associated with palm oil, they have dropped significantly. Now, RSPO, people might have issues with, and it might not be perfect, but it is moved the dial. And so I do think that there are success stories. There are sectors that have been under immense scrutiny for decades. They know what's going on. There are other sectors that have got away with not much scrutiny, and they are really new to the party and this whole topic. And to be honest, they're not even at the understanding stage. They're at the awareness stage.
Yeah, so some of the tools that we've been talking about, like a business strategy handbook, can help. TNFD can help.
Hugely helpful, those strategies, because we're a bank. We're not here to tell people what good looks like. So the broader community defining what good looks like, what Eva's team have produced, we can point our clients to and go, that's how you start on this journey. We're not here to tell you because we're bankers.
Yeah. Last quick comment.
Well, I think many of us are already on that path. I mean, from our point of view, we're working with 500,000 plus smallholders around the world directly, and providing technical assistance, support to make the transition. You turn up to a farmer who's been conducting certain practices for all their life and tell them you want to do something different, asking them to bet the farm to all intents and purposes. Now, we can support with premiums, we can support with other financial instruments, including microinsurance and so on. What I think really helps, though, we've got scale, but we're a microscopic part of the food system. So this idea of working in landscapes with other actors, that way we can really multiply our efforts. And I think that kind of coordination is what we want, because if we do this independently over here and independently over there, we're not going to get anywhere with this. And I think what we need is to get a whole momentum around this, and that again is what the Regenerative Landscapes Action Agenda is all about.
And I think that's not just in food and ag, that applies actually across all sectors. And to your point, Oliver, a lot of companies are only at the start of really understanding.
We're now at a point where, and this picks up a little bit on TNFD, we're now at a point, I think, where there are a handful of companies that are out in front. Making us run a little bit faster isn't going to change the game. There are something like 58,000 listed companies. How many of those are still on the couch while we're trying to win the Olympics? We need to get them off the couch to 5K, and then we might get somewhere in a collective park run towards this.
Exactly.
Hallelujah.
And then from a park run to a marathon at a sprint pace. I think my analogies are all falling apart here really badly.
Good analogies, but also making sure that we're not going off in such a such a crazy direction without considering the decisions we make. So with the climate and nature nexus, mostly they're all co-benefits, but I heard this week there are 1,400 planned mines that are in biodiversity hotspots, a third of which are for the materials we need for the renewable energy transition. So we also need to acknowledge that going steam ahead with blinkers on is not also going to be the answer.
So we need to understand the impacts and dependencies, the risks and opportunities, and the trade-offs that come with this, and we need to make adult decisions about what we're going to do. Look, it's been a fantastic panel, right? Thank you all. Thank you for getting energized. Thank you for your questions. I'd love you all to say a big thank you to our panel, to Alex, Eva, Rob, Oliver, and Dan. And it just remains for me to say there should be, I hope, I trust, refreshments outside. Please carry on the conversation later and have a great rest of your COP experience.
Thank you.